Hello students, you're welcome once again. Today we'll be discussing about transportation. Transportation is a very familiar topic because each and every one of us do use this means almost on a daily basis. So hopefully we'll be able to understand or even quickly relate with whatever we're going to discuss in the class. The learning objectives include one to explain the importance of transportation to the tourism industry. So we're going to look at the tourism industry or transportation generally and how it really impacts the tourism industry. Basically, transportation, of course, is very, very important to any of the industries. We're going to focus on the tourism industry. Next, we'll identify and describe the major components of the tourism transportation system. And from there, we'll try to explain the differences between passenger railroad operations within and outside the United States. That's our mode of reference. Thereafter, we'll try to explain the importance of automobiles, and then we'll describe the role and importance of water transportation as it is very, very important. Then we'll describe how airlines operate in a deregulated and competitive environment. First of all, we'll be dealing with the transportation and the modes. Like we all know what transportation is. This is what we all involve in or engage in almost on a daily basis, depending on the kind of the type of transportation that we are embarking on. And we know that there is no doubt or gainsaying in the fact that the tourism industry cannot even function without transportation, without effective and efficient transportation system. There are different modes, like I mentioned earlier. It could be through automobile, it could be through airplanes, it could be through train, and so on and so forth. Of course, these are not limited, or these are not the only modes of transportation, but basically we can categorize them, we can conveniently categorize them into two broad categories, and that is the surface, which include transportation by land and water. And the second category now is the air. All right, transportation is often intermodal. Intermodal meaning that two or more different types of transportation are being combined, all right, or provided to give customers a kind of more excellent and travel experience. All right, so when you talk about intermodal, for example, you may have maybe a bus travel between maybe two cities, and then from there they take a train to another destination. So it's more or less like a combination of different modes of transportation. So transportation is often intermodal, with travelers relying on several different types of transportation to meet their final destinations. Don't forget that we're always making reference to the tourism industry. So when we say customers here, we mean tourists. So when travelers, of course, when we use travelers at times too, we could be referring to tourists, or we're majorly referring to tourists here. So using intermodal transportation for travelers or tourists now is going to give them a kind of a different experience, all right, experience that they're really going to appreciate, and it makes the whole essence of the tourism effective and efficient. So here is an example of intermodal transportation and the times. You can see here, from here we have the first start from Hong Kong to Chicago, okay, by air, and then from Chicago to Kalamazoo, okay, pardon my pronunciation, from there to Mokensho City, right, through air again. And you can see that if you go through the pictures, you see the different modes of transportation, both air, road, you can see bus here, all right, and even by sea, okay, you can see ship air, and even by road here, car, we'll see car. So this are intermodal transportation, transporting maybe goods, freight or travelers from one destination to another using different modes of transportation. So now we're starting with the surface transportation. Don't forget that we've mentioned that we have two means of transportation. That's the surface, which includes the land and water, and then we also have the air, right? So we're starting with the surface transportation now, with particular reference to water transportation, right? Or let's say sailing, using the the water transportation in terms of maybe the ship or whatever. So history of water travel, sailing vessels were actually at the mercy of wind, meaning that the wind was highly responsible, all right, or highly responsible for the kind of, the travel experience with water, because these vessels actually need the direction of the wind, all right. When or with a favorable wind, then we can say you have a smooth sailing, all right. Only sailors can explain this. They will tell you they have a smooth sailing because of the wind. But when the wind is dead, when there is no wind and the slicks are slack, then they usually what they will do was to the crew will have no option than to wait again for the wind to return, because the wind was actually really very responsible, very important when it comes to sailing on the sea. And that is why the sailing vessels were actually at the mercy of the wind. So steamships allowed scheduled travel. It was only after the introduction of the steam-powered ship, all right, in Europe, that the sailing was actually more maybe convenient, and people could actually schedule their travel. Initially, they had to wait for the wind. When there is no wind, then traveling becomes difficult. Traveling via the sea became difficult. But with time, when the steamships were developed or introduced in Europe, then it was easier, right? It was easier to travel via scheduled traveling. Of course, we also have the development of the cruise ship as well, and all these are very important when it comes to transportation via water or the sea. The riding the rails also. We've talked about the water. Now we want to talk about the rail. All these are still part of surface transportation. The land, the water, and the rail are all part of the surface transportation, while the second category is the air transportation. So now we want to talk about the history of the railroad. Simply put, the railroad developed in the 80s, all right, in the 1800s. That was in Europe, right? Specifically in 1825, if I'm not mistaken. The importance of sleeping and lodging facility in boosting long distance rail travel was also very noticeable, right, during this period, because passengers actually they patronized the railroad, because it was despite the fact that it covered a long distance, they had to travel maybe a long distance. It was still very important to travelers, as they really patronized, and this boosted some other part of the tourism experience. For example, maybe lodging facilities where people will have to sleep over before they connect or before they continue their long distance journey. All right. Passenger rail service in the US and Canada began to decline in the 1940s. All right, it began to decline in the 1940s. The continental service began in the US around 1969, and in Canada it began around 1885. So that's just the brief introduction or brief history of railroad. It actually started in Europe before it was now also adopted in US and Canada, all right, in 1869 and 85 respectively. And by the time we got to the 1940s, it started to decline in both countries. That's US and Canada. So here is just a comparison of travel times between Washington, D.C., Chicago, and Illinois. Canada and the United States follow similar tracks for rail service. Don't forget that I mentioned that the rail service actually was developed in Europe, and it was later that Canada and US actually also joined or developed the rail system. But later it started to decline. So, but for some reasons, the government intervention saved the rail system in the US. That was around 1971. And in Canada around 1978. Don't forget that we've mentioned that around the 1940s, it started to decline, all right? The patronage started to decline. So there are these two bodies, that's the Amtrak, which is the marketing name for National Railroad and Passenger Corporation, and in the US. And then we have the VRL Canada, which is the marketing name for Canada's passenger train teamwork. These these two bodies usually receive financial support from the government, and that was what actually boosted, all right, or revived the rail systems in both countries, I mean the US and Canada. Both of them are non-governmental agencies, but they do receive financial support from the governments of both countries to revive the rail transportation system, and they are still in existence today, even though the patronage is not still as high as that of the other form like the air, right? So Amtrak and the Via Rail Canada services, like I mentioned, are non-governmental agencies, but they do receive grants, all right, or support from the government. They've also embarked on marketing strategies, which has actually increased the ridership for both, all right, especially packaging and rail passes. They've tried to come up with rail passes and other marketing and packaging to attract more patronage from the people. It has also enhanced the speed and service, make travel time less, all right, then by rail than air for some city pairs. This has also enhanced the speed as well as the service, and it has actually made the travel time less compared to maybe air for some city pairs. Okay, note that for some city pairs, because basically or generally the air time, I mean the air travel is usually faster than any mode of transportation. So despite the fact that we mentioned that this rail has declined, or declined in the 1940s in US and Canada, it is still a very, very important mode of intercity transportation in Europe and Asia. If you look at both countries very well, they are still high users of the rail mode of transportation. High-speed trains carry passengers between large population centers. If you look at so many Asian countries, you see that they still patronize or use the rail system, the rail transportation system a lot. Although the train travel has declined, like I mentioned, in Canada and US, it has also continued to be an important mode of transportation in these countries as well. But in Europe, forget it, it's a major or one of the main mode of transportation. All right, so often rail travel is more popular than air travel, especially where you have large populated countries or places that are more convenient and they're less expensive. For some of us that have used this form of transportation or mode of transportation, we can attest to the fact that it is very, very less expensive compared to maybe air, and then it is more convenient. Here is the comparison of train and air travel time between key European countries. Don't forget that I mentioned earlier that the air transportation is usually faster at times. You can see by air, London to Edinburgh is just 1 hour 15 minutes. Meanwhile, by rail it is 4 hours. All right. From Hamburg to Munich is 6 hours by rail, while by air is just 1 hour 15 minutes. And then from Rome to Milan is 4 hours, 4 good hours by rail. But meanwhile, if you are traveling by air, you spend only 1 hour 5 minutes. So air transportation could be that much faster, but the rail is also more convenient and less expensive. It's very cheap compared to the air mode of transportation. I mentioned earlier that Asian and European rail services are also very, very much developing. They are on the high side, despite the fact that the rail service system is declining in US and Canada, or declined in US and Canada in the 1940s. Despite that, in Europe and Asia, they've actually blaze ahead because the rail transportation system continues to soar, people continue to patronize. The EU Rail Pass attracted non-European international travelers more. All right, it's due to the EU Rail Pass, where passengers are allowed to tour the EU member countries. All right, using this Rail Pass. So the EU Rail Pass is used as a marketing tool to attract international visitors from outside the European community, because it is available only to non-European tourists. All right, only non-European tourists were allowed to use the EU Rail Pass. Then, pass holders are allowed unlimited travel for varying periods of time throughout the Western Europe. So for member countries, they all came together, came up with this EU Rail Pass. Okay, the pass is given to non-EU citizens or visitors, all right, and they are allowed unlimited access or travel period across all these Western European countries majorly. The trend towards privatizing government's old rail system was also one of the remarkable experience in the Asian and European rail services. All right, there was the tendency of privatizing the government-owned systems. Crossing the highway and byways. The French and English innovated the road construction. All right, now we've concluded on the rail. We're now moving to the road. All right, we are all familiar with highways and byways, so we know what they are. So it was the French and the English that innovated the road construction. These are basically related to road construction. When we hear highway, of course, we already know what it means. Some people do refer to it as express roads or something like that, but they are basically road construction. Development in the road system increased auto travels, right? Either via automobiles or via motor coaches or luxurious buses. We call them motor coaches or luxurious buses. So the reasons for preference. What are the reasons for preference for this automobile or the road transportation, the road form of transportation? One of the reasons is the cost. It is also cost effective or efficient. It is convenient, and then there is ability to explore. You can explore, you can change routes, right? You can, there are times that we have different routes leading to the same way. So it is very easy to navigate your way. Even at times when you are using all this GPS and the like, okay. For example, Waze, Google Maps, and there are times that when you do not follow the stated routes that have been asked to follow, then the GPS will reroute, all right? It will reroute, and then it will find another route to that particular destination. So you can explore, you can change your route, you can, navigate many parts of the road to access wherever you are going. US and Canada have funded highways instead of the rail tracks. Don't forget that we mentioned that of course there have been decline. So since then the government have actually funded the road instead of the rail tracks. There is growth in the rental car market as a result of the development of the highways and the byways, and this is also very, very important to the tourism industry. Of course, when tourists go to their destinations, maybe for holiday, for vacation, for business, and for other purposes, they may need to transport to move from one place to another. So, of course, there will be growth in the rental market. Since it's not their permanent place of residence, they have to find a means of transportation, and this has also led to the increase in the rental car market. And the automobile is also dominated by business travelers, but there is growth in the leisure market as well. It's majorly dominated by business travelers. Most people travel for business purposes, but the leisure market is also growing. Those that go for holidays or vacation and the likes. There's fleet utilization and logistics are also important to the success of the automobile industry. So here is the table of figures showing the growth in major business leisure rental car supplies in the United States, between 2010 and 2015. Now we want to move to motor coaches. All right, I mentioned earlier that these are what popularly known as the luxurious buses. All right, intercity bus travel has declined until recent years, while group motor coach travel has increased. Okay, people now patronize these motor coaches more than the intercity bus travel, right? They are also, for various reasons, for those of us that have had the experience, we realize that they are more spacious, they are more convenient, and so many other reasons like that when you compare the normal buses to the motor coaches. New designs have increased the comfort, the services available, as well as the capacity. For a bus, maybe you want to have a maximum of maybe 15 seaters or something like that. Meanwhile, for coaches, you might even have tens of people, like maybe like 50, 60 travelers on the same motor coach. There are times you even have some double level or double decker motor coaches like that. So you have high capacity, right? There is a large capacity, so to say. The services, different services are also available. There are some that even have the Wi-Fi connection. You have maybe toilet facilities and some, and some other services as well. And there is increased comfort. Okay, it's spacious enough. There are times that you can adjust the sitting. The seat you might be able to maybe recline it, and so on and so forth. So all these make the journey or make the passengers more comfortable using the motor coaches. Soaring through the skies, of course. Here in the sky, we should know that we are now moving on to the air transportation, all right, the air mode of transportation. Air travel is a 20th century mode of travel, right? We mentioned about the sailing first. That was around the 80s, before 18s, before we move to the 19s, where we have the buses and the lights. And now we are moving to the 20th century, which is the century of the air form of transportation. Jet travel only in the second half of the century. We have cooperative organizations which have made the industry more efficient. Organizations such as the ATA, that is the Air Transport Association, where we have US Domestic Alliance, and we have the IATA, which is that of the international body. All right, that's the International Air Transport Association. So all these have they have come together, all right, to make the airline industry more effective also and more attractive to the tourists or travelers generally. Cooperative organizations make the industry more efficient. Like I mentioned earlier, it makes it more efficient and more effective. These associations make it possible for passengers to purchase a single ticket, although they may travel on planes owned and operated by several companies in a single trip, right? It's possible that you are boarding a particular air with people that are, that also bought their own ticket from several other different companies, all right? And all of you will be on the same aeroplane or airplane. Here is a figure showing the domestic and international US airline industry show operating expenses. We have salary and benefits accounting for 26.4%, fuel 25.1%, aircraft maintenance 9.7%, aircraft ownership 11.6%, transport related 13.5%, and then all other comprises just 13.7%. So these are the share of operating expenses. Operating in a deregulated environment. When we say deregulation, we mean removing all regulations, right? Removing rules and regulation. All right, so airline travel was deregulated in US in 1978. And this has brought about so many changes, as we can see on the slide. The changes due to the regulation includes one, competition on price, right? people could compete, or maybe stakeholders could actually compete. Okay, you can attract customers based on the price that you're charging. If company A is charging maybe $2, you might charge maybe $1.9 just to attract more customers. So this is one of the changes due to the regulation. There is increase in the number of airlines serving in any industry. Since there are no restrictions, since there are no regulations, since there is no embargo on maybe the number of companies that can register or something like that, so there was free entry and exit. So this increased the number of airlines serving any city. In addition to that, airlines also enter and leave the airport service as well. Like I mentioned earlier, there is free entry and exit. All right, during the deregulation era, it's allowed for free entry and exit from the airline industry. Airlines can also package and market tour as tour operators. Apart from being airline operators, they might also they are also free, right? They are also free to engage in or act as tour operators. So all these are the changes that were brought about as a result of the regulation. In addition to the previously mentioned points, operating in a deregulated environment has also brought about what we call the hub and spoke system. Okay, the hub and spoke system is a system of transportation in which local airports will offer flights to a particular central airport, okay, where international or maybe long distance flights are available. So you can board the local flight from one city to another, to a particular city, where you can now have airlines that will take you on a longer distance to maybe for international trip and so on and so forth. So this system actually reduce the cost of operation and increase the load factors. Apart from that, use of code sharing agreements link regional carriers to national lines as a result of the deregulation of the airline industry. More so, there are new smaller regional jets available, and these are being tried to increase the direct flight. They are being tried to increase the direct flight for long distance journey across regions of the world. So all these are changes that have been brought about as a result of the deregulation of the airline industry. There is a figure showing hub and spoke system. You have different destinations, and you have different flights connecting from maybe different places. For example, here we have Hong Kong to Vancouver, and then from Vancouver you can take another flight to take, for instance, Moscow. Can you see? So all these are examples of hub and spoke system of transportation. And lastly, we want to talk about decoding the language of the airline world. How do you decode? What are those things that you see, or how do you interpret some things that you see, at least for somebody that has taken this course, or for somebody that has come across some of these terminologies? So each airline has a 2-letter identification code. All right, it has a 2-letter identification code. So next time when you see maybe flight EA, so at times when you see those letters, you should be able to know or identify them as the identification code. Each city with scheduled air service has 3-letter codes, right? Each city with scheduled air service has 3-letter codes. So when you see 3-letter code on airline, you should know that they are for cities. There are classes of service. Classes of service also have code. The class of service that this airline provide also have code. All right, there are particular code for the classes of service. Maybe you want to talk about the first class, the business class, the economy. So all these also have code. The type of the flights have special name. All right, there are some that are direct, some that are non-stop. All right, direct and non-stop. All these have special name. Passenger trip type are given special terms, e.g. the round trip, the open jaw, and so on and so forth. So all these are language of the airline world that you might be able to or that you should be able to identify or to decode when you see them. Maybe you find the 2-letter word on an airline and 2-letter code on an airline, so you should be able to know. When you have 3-letter code, then you should be able to know that, okay, it's a city, for example, LOS is usually used for Lagos, right? Lagos, Nigeria, you find LOS, okay? So you are traveling, for example, from Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia to Lagos, so you'll find KUL, which stands for Kuala Lumpur, that's the city in Malaysia, to LOS, all right? So you should be able to decode that, okay, this is Kuala Lumpur to Lagos. So you know, what is it called? Will you find maybe Malaysia to Nigeria? No, it's usually the city. So it's usually between the cities. So you have 3 letters word decoding each city. On this note, we've come to the end of our discussion today, though very brief. I know that we should have understood, or we are even familiar with all this maybe mode of transportation, and we must have at least used maybe 1 or 2 or even more, even all, depending on the circumstance. All right, so some of us have explored all, some of us have maybe explored maybe everything but 1, you know. Some of us have explored maybe 2 or 3, you know, the different kinds of transportation. But basically, we've tried to touch the air, the land, and, you know, the surface comprising of the land, sea, and road. I mean, the road, the sea, and the rail, and then the second category, which is the air. So on this note, we've come to the end of our discussion today. Thank you so much for your audience, and I hope to see you again in the next class, inshallah. Thank you. Bye. See you next time.